Good morning, Rabbi.
Before we begin, just some scheduling. Because tomorrow is Tisha B'Av, there will not be Mishnayos in the morning. I will be away Friday morning. So Mishnayos will resume again in Mitzvah Hashem next Sunday. Okay, so we're learning Mishnayos, Bava Kamma, Parakeh, Chapter 5. We are in the middle of Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. So we begin from, we actually began this a little bit yesterday. Nafal l'seicha shara v'kela v'nishtabru. A ox and its gear, like a plow or whatever other things that it has on it, so the animal with its gear fell into the pit, v'nishtabru. And the shar, the ox was damaged, so were the vessels. So was its gear. Chamar v'kela v'niskaru, or let's say a donkey and its gear, like whatever it's carrying, and the bundles that it carried, the niskaru, and they tore. So we got two things that got damaged: the animal and all those things on it. Says the Mishna, Chayav ala behema, you're obligated to pay for the animal, upater ala kelim, but you are exempt for paying for the objects. Now, so this is because the Torah says, if a man uncovers a pit or digs a pit, and an ox or a donkey falls there, the owner of the pit shall pay. So the Gemara says, by mentioning only animals, the verse implies that he must pay only for damage to animals, not for damage to their gear or other objects they are carrying. Okay? So that's the source of why the mazik of bar, the damager of bar, you're not obligated, the owner, the one responsible for the pit, is not obligated to pay for the broken objects. Now the Mishnah continues. Nafal l'seichai, lost place. Nafal l'seichai shar chayre shaita v'katan chayev. If what fell into the pit was a deaf or foolish or young ox, then you are chayev for them falling in. This implies that this is an animal that kind of doesn't know what's going on with it. It's not paying attention to what's going on. Can't pay attention to what's going on. However, but the point of the Mishnah is, if you're talking about a regular ox, and a regular ox fell into a pit, you wouldn't be liable. Why? Because animals typically will, sense or see, they pay attention to where they're going. They're going to see the hole, and they're going to stay away from it. If at the end of the day it landed up in the hole, that was falling into the pit. That was something unexpected, and therefore the owner would not be responsible. Okay? So now, a couple of things here. Number one, it says that the animals that were mentioned before don't take care to avoid pits. As mentioned, one of the previous notes mentions, when we say a young ox means before an ox has been trained to pull a plow, it runs about wildly and does not avoid obstacles. And therefore, you're going to be responsible for that expected damage of that kind of an animal. Now, it's not only these examples that the Mishnah gave. Let's say it was at night. An animal is walking at night. Mm-hmm. Can't expect the animal then to be able to see the hole. Or a blind one, even during the day. It's a blind animal. Didn't mention that. Mm-hmm. It's blind. It can't see. Again, that would be the kind of animal that there is the expectation that would fall into the pit, and you'd be liable for that. Okay, now, so the Mishnah says that if these animals fall in, you're liable. Other animals, we say, they're able to see the pit and they walk around it. Now, however, they say like this, and we mentioned this yesterday, that number one, let's say it was covered. Now, we're talking about an open pit. What if the pit was covered, but it wasn't covered strong enough, wasn't covered well enough, didn't have such a strong cover to be able to withstand an animal that would fall in? Then we say that you cannot expect the animal to sense that the cover is sturdy enough. If it's a hole, the animal senses it. If it's covered, then the animal thinks it's okay. And if therefore the cover on it was not a strong one, you would again be liable for the animal that stepped on it and fell in. Okay? So what we have here is, a very important qualification about when we talk about that a person uncovers or digs a hole, that they're liable for the damage that happens to an animal that falls in, it really has to be qualified. And that is, if you're talking about an open hole in regular animals, you're not going to be liable for that because it's not expected that they're going to fall in. They typically pay attention when there's a hole. They sense it and they're going to stay away from it. What's interesting is that we have to bear in mind for the next part of the Mishnah Then when you talk about a person, talk about a person falling into a hole. Do we say the same thing about a person? Well, he should be aware of where he's going and not fall into the hole. The answer is we don't say that. People are not. People, when they walk, I'll read it to you. If any people are less likely to avoid obstacles because they are often busy with their thoughts and do not pay attention to where they are going. That's from a previous Mishnah. Accordingly, if any person, even one who is mature and sane, falls into a pit and is injured, the owner of the pit cannot claim that this was an unexpected accident. Okay? That's by a person who gets injured. Now, it's important to know that right now, the next part of the Mishnah is going to talk about what happens when a person falls into a pit and they get killed. Okay? So now we've spoken about before, if a pit is 10 tefachim deep, that's considered deep enough to kill an animal. And if the animal falls in and dies, then you're obligated to pay. If it was less than 10 tefachim deep and an animal fell in and died, that's unexpected, and you wouldn't be obligated for that. We just read in the Mishnah that based on the words chamor or kalim, that when the Mishnah talked about paying for the damage of a pit, it used specific examples of an animal that told us, okay, it's an animal that you have to pay for, but not for vessels, not for things. Now the Mishnah is going to tell us that you know who else is going to be excluded from the payment for this damage? A person, because if the Torah says chamor or kalim, and that excludes things, well, it excludes people too, because a person is not an animal, and therefore the Mishnah says like this: Bain oibas, which literally translated means even a young boy or girl. Eved oy a slave or maidservant, if they fall into the pit and they die, they die from it. Putter, the owner of the pit is exempt. He does not have to pay. The same way things are excluded, so too people are excluded. Now, let me read to you from the bottom about what it says about this last line, because it's important to point out the last line is very interesting because it speaks about specific examples: a young boy, a young girl, a slave. How about a regular adult? So the halacha is like this. Although the law applies to all people, the Mishnah mentions only children and Canaanite slaves. It mentions children in order to teach that although children cannot be expected to avoid obstacles, and thus the blame for their death lies with the owner of the pit, the Torah exempts them from payment. Still exempt from payment. You're not liable for it. So although they may be like those animals that cannot watch themselves, like we had before, and those animals you are obligated to pay for, you will not be obligated to make any kind of compensation for the death of the child or of any other human being. And the point here is, even if you want to say, but okay, forget that. Now, and it mentions Canaanite slaves in order to teach that although they are owned by others, they kind of like things, the law exempting the owner from payment for the death of people applies to Canaanite slaves as well, since they too are people. So there may be people that have an ownership to them, but we say we don't compare them, we don't consider them like well, it wouldn't make a difference. But the point, because even objects are going to be exempt. But the point is that although again they are owned by others, nonetheless they are people, and therefore they are going to be exempt. Now, the owner of a pit is exempt only where the victim died. If the victim was merely injured, the owner must pay. This is because the verse that mentions an ox and a donkey, from which it is derived that no payments is required for people and objects, speaks of an ox or a donkey that died. That's what the pasuk is talking about. That's what the verse. That's the context of the verse. Thus, when this verse excludes people, it refers only to people who died and not to those who were injured. Okay, the exemption is only going to be for those who died and were not injured. Now, as far as objects are concerned, the owner of the pit is exempt even if they just broke. Why? Because the breaking of an object is equivalent to its death. Meaning, the exemption of the verse by the animals was an exemption from death. And that's going to exempt people who are killed in the bar. If they're injured, that means they didn't die. If they didn't die, you're going to be liable to pay for their injuries. Now, we said, so we're distinguishing between death and injury by a person. there's no distinction like that by a vessel. By a vessel, we say any time, whatever happens to the vessel, you're exempt. Why? Because in a vessel that breaks, it's like it's dead. It can't be used anymore, and therefore it's equivalent to its death, and therefore you're going to be exempt from any time that the object falls into the pit and breaks. Have a wonderful day, and again in a meaningful fast.